His name is Brion Gysin. He was born in England in 1916 to a Canadian mother and a British father who died in the trenches of France before Brion could know him. He grew up in Edmonton, Alberta, and then went back to England to attend a Catholic boys' school. He never could decide on a nationality. Sometimes he was Swiss, sometimes British, American, French, and Moroccan. He'd get angry if anyone called him Canadian, but he studied Japanese calligraphy, which was so important to his art, while training as a spy in the Canadian Army in World War II. He met his soulmate, William S. Burroughs, in Tangier in 1954, and fused his art with the great beat writer, together creating a kind of third mind, which led to remarkable collaborations in art and magic. Gysin died in Paris in 1986, poor and little known except to the amazing artists he still influences. A serious dabbler in the occult, he believed he was channeling the 10th century king of the assassins, Hassani Sabah, and just like him, had found a portal into the time-space continuum. The world wasn't ready for it. That was the story of his life.
It's hypnotic.
Have to look at it with closing the eyes.
Yes. Why did you close your eyes?
Wow. So was it a bit of a bugger to make?
Mostly because of the motor.
Yeah.
You were saying it's 10 hertz?
10 hertz is what we're after. It's got to be between 8 and 13. 10 is what we're after, is the ideal. And it creates this stroboscopic light effect, which if you close your eyes, engages the alpha waves in your brain, because it's the same dream state thing, right? And a lot of people get hallucinations and this kind of thing, right? And 1 in 4,000 people will have an epileptic fit.
We didn't know to close our eyes. Everybody was staring at it.
No. The whole point is you close your eyes.
All the stuff we read on the internet, and nothing said anything about closing your eyes.
You're kidding.
They just said to stare at it.
Yeah?
So, and staring at a 100-watt light bulb as
No, that's just going to be a little bit painful.
Yeah, and a bit dizzying after a little while.
You get dizzy even with the eyes closed effect.
Really?
Yeah, but it's supposed to be the drugless high. Created from systems of science, art, and magic, the Dreamachine is a kind of portal into the time-space continuum. It opens a window on a magical universe, a very real place inside all of our heads. To bring the Dreamachine to life again, we need to take a journey to find the keepers of the secret knowledge behind this flickering device.
Now, this is the idea that I had of telling Brion to put it on a thing, not to have it hanging down, but to have it on a fixed pole. Already, this looks wonderful.
Well, I think
but you're tormenting me, torture, total torture.
Well, you've waited 30 years. What's another 5 minutes?
30, well, it's a lot, you know.
I think we'll get it dark enough in here, right? Yeah, okay. Now, what kind of settings have you been giving people with this stuff? I mean, does it need the appropriate music or hashish or?
Look at that. Oh, it's hypnotic. I can't, that's the most tempting thing. I can't tell you how I want to sink into it to get 360-degree vision of this. Close my eyes first, I think, just to see that it works. Then the hallucinations take 2 or 3 minutes to How long did everybody else get hallucinated?
Well, Lee Ranallo instantly started seeing colors, shapes, things.
Were eyes open?
Eyes closed.
Where shall I sit for your best, is it profile or sit back here? Oh, man.
I remember going to an exhibition of Brion and Gysin, and there was the Dreamachine. I mean, I knew it was really special because I think I was tripping. And then I really understood what a beautiful, simple, magical object it is. I believe you have one there.
Oh my God, that's the way it should look. Oh, how beautiful. Oh. Oh, isn't that wonderful? Oh. Oh. Oh.
Now, should we draw the blinds first?
Oh, just...
Yeah.
Yeah, there, that's the way it should be. That's the way it should be.
I turned around and I looked at it. I just watched it for a while. And as you saw, it starts to go in and out. You start seeing, and then it looks like it's slowing down and speeding up. And then I closed my eyes. And immediately a flood of angels flew out of the night or out of the starry sky into, well, it was almost indescribable, through a tunnel right past me. And it was a complete eureka moment. I just went, oh my God, this machine actually works.
It's really like touching God in a way, you know? You're somewhere that you don't have access to in your daily life. It's kind of funny because the Dreamachine relates to that early forms of cinema as well as to like 60s drug culture because, boy, it's certainly evocative of a drug trip, just what I'm seeing.
Yeah, I would trade this for a TV set.
Well, I'm seeing the shapes. And then I see darkness. But it's kind of friendly darkness.
How do you explain the Dreamachine?
The story of the Dreamachine began in 1958, in December. Brion Gysin was traveling on a coach to Marseille in order to visit an artist colony there. Brion was tired and laid his head against the window and closed his eyes and drifted like that. Unconsciously at first, he was experiencing flashes of sunlight.
As I was riding down a road and closed my eyes in the back of a bus and had these extraordinary visions, which I thought at that time were some kind of spiritual grace which had been allotted to me. But I found out later that this was a purely physiological, neurological effect known as the activity within the alpha rhythm of the brain.
As soon as this vision ended, Gysin asked, what happened to me? And the person he asked was Burroughs, his great friend, and they were co-inhabitants at that time at the Beat Hotel. And so he wrote Burroughs, what happened? And Burroughs wrote back, we must storm the citadels of enlightenment. The means are at hand. And he was referring to what was the Dreamachine, that there was a way to harness the visionary potential of light.
There's just, there's very vivid reds and blues. But,
Rock stars have always been really big on dream machines. They found one in Kurt Cobain's house after his suicide, and there have been whispers ever since that it fed his nihilistic reveries. Something bad happened to Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones, too, back in the days of flower power. The Dream Machine didn't kill anybody, of course. It was just around.
Tranquil imagery, which is a good thing.
Only a magical creature could think up something like that. It is like a wonderful, idealistic idea. But you know it's never going to fly. People, unfortunately, prefer television.
Brion ultimately was a way of perceiving the world. He wasn't a work of art, and he wasn't an artist. He didn't make things with that being the end in itself. Later on, he started to try to. But really, I think, behind everything, he was trying to teach people to see differently.
You imagine a nation of people glued to their television sets, you know, all sitting in their living rooms, you know, mom, dad, the kids, the dog, the cat, you know, all sort of in this blue, gray light, bathed in this, and like automatons, you know, like a nation of automatons. And suddenly you have an alternative to that, and that alternative is a kind of a beautiful device that moves and that allows each of those people in that room to have a completely different experience, and that there's no sort of central authority that's you know, projecting this from a studio somewhere, but rather each of these people are inventing their own scripts and their own films. This was the ultimate way to defeat control.
What has been hitherto considered as incalculable can now, with our modern means of neurological aids, which are these machines that we're using, we can actually calculate them. Well, as soon as you calculate that, you come to the end of a sum, and therefore this must be a program. And if there's a program, there would seem to be a programmer. And this programmer is hiding behind the name of control. So therefore we get into this other area that Burroughs has been so very interested in. And that was, in a way, what really brought us together, these same sort of vision of the possibilities of the human brain, both by interruption, accidental interruption like the cut-ups, or provoked accident like the Dream Machine. One actually changed people's memories, first of all, in that as much as all of you now who've looked at the machine very recently, you have a set of very vivid and very immediate memories, which is more than art has ever done. I mean, pictures of whatever kind have ever done. Certainly under the influence of drugs, many people who have smoked cannabis for thousands of years have produced art objects or a series of repetitive design, which are very much like what one sees in the Dream Machine and which one experiences by smoking cannabis.
Anything that can be done chemically can be done in other ways.
These guys were kind of like looking at the world as a particle physics of language, where if you had access to the right codes, you could access all sorts of distant realms, interstellar space, cosmic realms, magnetic pulses, you name it. So there was a kind of magic realism going on with Burroughs and Gysin. And the Dream Machines were meant to tap into these kind of magic code landscapes and let the subconscious become a kind of an open system.
I usually don't show, but I'll do it for you, for Brion's sake, because Brion saw it when it was brand new. It's at least 30 years old, so it's faded slightly. Look, the oldest alpha wave machine or Dream Machine was staring into a fire, like a bonfire, and the flickering and all that. I mean, this was something to meditate on, and it's always different. In other words, you'll never see two flames exactly the same. I mean, build a little something in your fireplace, and you've created a whole world there. And you could take snap pictures of it, as I've done, and suddenly you see a demon face in those flames. You could say it was just an accident of shadows, but you could see quite specific things in the flames.
Yes, yes, yes.
Wow. It's totally incredible. I mean, there's all kinds of blues and reds and like turquoises and like breaking up into little sort of like pixelated dots, kind of like magical checkerboards, sort of going out to infinity on the edge of what would be my vision, I guess.
The pattern that goes on the back of my eyelids is basically my eyes are seeing through a small curtain of blood pulsing through my eyelids. So the color red and the orange of the interior of the Dreamachine kind of make a really interesting optical backdrop. The funny thing is this kind of flickering I've seen at nightclubs quite a bit with all the cyber lasers they use. You know, in the middle of the night, you'll have all these lights flickering.
Hypnotic, hypnotic. This is really absolutely wonderful. Even if I was hoping I'd hallucinate, just watching all the changing patterns is fascinating because they do, I mean, they do look like women, Arabic women in hijabs, and they look like heels on shoes. Hypnotic.
Can you get the shoes? Should I close my eyes? They induce so much pain that there's nothing else but to dream to get out of it, right? To get out of the pain.
The Beats were three writers named Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, and William S. Burroughs, who wrote ecstatic, transcendent prose poetry that turned on a whole generation to a new way of seeing. They were the precursors of the hippies and the flower children, but with all the ecstasy and transcendence, they told the truth about the cruel shoes, the hard world. Truman Capote famously said that beat writing was only typing, and he wasn't totally wrong. The idea was spontaneous genius. First thought, best thought, words talk.
And then that's when I introduced other colors. It would go warmer, more purple. And then it was funny when I leaned back, completely different colors. You know, so it's amazing. It's almost like it turns into its primary opposite, right?
The brain is still is a black box. So you put something in it and something comes out. But what is actually happening, we don't know. Madame, bonjour.
Bonjour, monsieur.
Vous parlez l'anglais?
Yes, I do.
I'm a neurologist from the Netherlands, from Rotterdam. I'm writing a paper about the Dreamachine, and I'm wondering if you would show me Brion Gysin's room here in the hotel.
Oh, it is impossible, because the whole hotel was renovated.
So there's this construct of secret knowledge then.
Yeah, well, they were trying to blast it wide open at the Beat Hotel, you know. Let's give it to everybody, you know. Come one, come all, and, you know, one could look at that as rather irresponsible in many ways. But, of course, they were working along the lines like there are only minutes to go, so this was justified. Anything was justified.
And for the purpose, as it puts it, of abolishing all nuclear weapons.
They all live together in separate rooms. I'm sure that place has been described to you already?
We've been there. We were there yesterday.
Yeah, but that had nothing to do with what it looked like then. There were rats all over the place.
Just at the time of the Beat Hotel, you know, one shower for the whole building. When you needed a shower, you had to buy a key. And when you had the key, you invited all your friends in the shower. Americans used to call my lift the love machine because it is so small.
Should we go in there together then?
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
But you go first.
You are too young for me.
Shattered the theater, the oven, your two-bit narrative line to Walgreens. The theme explodes strictly from Moochville.
His relationship, a very creative and fundamentally important relationship between Burroughs and he, not only in Tangiers and in Paris, but in New York and everywhere, was finally recognized as one of the great friendships of the literary century.
Well, it's not really that peculiar. You know, if you read Bill's letters as opposed to his books, you know, you can see how incredibly needy he was, really, and how much he wanted to be loved.
I was whatever, in my mid-20s, and my first 34
LSD trips were taken with Brion Gysin in the Hotel Chelsea, room 703. So he had a very strong effect on me. The closest person in Brion's life was William, and the closest person in William's life was Brion. I mean, almost like beyond lover. They never had sex, but it was as though they were lifelong lovers, bonded and devoted to each other.
And Brion did love him. Unconditionally.
All the beams are dated 1480. You realize if the beams could speak? 1480.
It's really ancient.
And you know, when I arrived in 1980s, I started to clean the hotel with wallpapers. And sometimes some people scratched my paper. I said, why? Hey, they were looking for painting. I even had a gallery from New York coming here. I said, if you find painting on a wall, I buy you the wall. I thought he was crazy.
There was only one telephone, and I remember Brion and I laughing about it so many times when we met 20, 30, 40 years later. And he would, whenever he would see me, or I would see him, we'd cry out, Madame Rachou! Madame Rachou! Because that was the owner. She was a wonderful old lady. She knew about all these crazy gay potheads and et cetera. But she sort of like was very motherly about it. And when somebody called on the telephone from one of them, she couldn't walk up or didn't feel like walking up 5 or 6 flights. So she'd go out into the street and say, Brion, is the telephone?
Yes. Hello.
Look at that picture. Hello.
Yes.
Where are we now?
Yes. Hello.
I miss Brion so. I keep thinking he's still there at the Beat Hotel or something.
Oh, we're convinced that he's actually following us around with us.
Following us around every minute.
I think he's in the machine. This is the ghost in the machine.
That's right. He was always so interested in finding out what his name should be. Did it look better Brion, B-R-I-O-N, or did it look better B-R-I-I-N, or G-Y-S-I-N, or G-Y-S-O-N?
It was Gysin who discovered the idea of cutting up words and sentences and rearranging them as mind-scrambling magic spells, the cut-ups.
He was an important bridge between William Burroughs and Europe, William Burroughs and Morocco, a two-way bridge, and a great poet and an important painter. And a performer. He would be a commanding presence on stage, always very smiling and very gentlemanlike. You almost expected him to be a crooner, but of course, what came out of his mouth were not Hollywoodian songs. They were very post-Dadaistic, prophetic implementations.
But I love his paintings very much, too. You know, all that is very interesting, but I just love his ordinary sort of paintings.
Gysin, lui, réinvente cette grille, se la réapproprie, et avec l'idée du rouleau, de la Dreamachine et donc de la calligraphie, tout ça confondu, qui donne corps à une œuvre vraiment complètement unique. C'est un objet absolument magique qui, je trouve, est peut-être pas assez mis en évidence, en tout cas à l'intérieur de notre musée, parce que précisément c'est un objet, on ne sait pas trop où il se situe.
Oh, the bulb didn't come on it.
He gave me a copy of Let the Mice In, which was a really, really beautiful book. I was wild at the time. I've lost the book. I don't know where it is. But Let the Mice In was great and proposed the same idea that the cut-ups do. Basically, if you can find a way to stop tending the structure, the building and just let the mice in. They will, something much more, something nice is going to happen. You know, you'll like this. Let's do this. Let's let the mice in. And which was the same idea. The cut-ups are basically words talk. Words talk.
I am that I am. I am that am I. Am I that I am? Am I that am? I that I am. Am that I? Am I? That I am, I am. That am I am. That I am I? That I am. That am I? I that am I? I that am. I am I. Am that. I am. Am I that? Am I that I am? I am that I am. I am I that am. I am I that? I am that am I. I am that. I am that. I am that I am I. Am that. Am I? Am that I? I am that. I am that. Am I?
And so on. You know, on it goes. But of course, what he's incredibly famous for is inventing the cut-up.
I had a number of sheets of newspapers, some British newspapers, American newspaper published in Paris, and some other things that happened to be lying on my desk when I took a Stanley blade and cut through them, and these little bits and pieces looked so amusing to me that I started jiggling them around as one would in a collage.
Chip, cut, tangle, forward line.
Hello?
Hello?
Yes.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes.
Yes.
Hello?
Yes. Hello.
Yes. Yes. Hello?
Yes.
Look at
Hello?
that picture.
The cut-ups I'd been into for a long time and hadn't known those were so commonly credited to Burroughs that it was only after I read Burroughs on it that I realized it was from Brion. So when I met him, I knew who he was.
I said I'm Ira Cohen. Anyway, you don't have to like me if you don't want to. But just don't tell me about it. That was really a good shot, huh? I created the shot, really. Brion was just sitting there, and I just nosed right into him so she could get a good double profile. The first time that I met Brion in his room, he was talking about the cut-up, Minutes to Go, which I read at that time. And when I went home, I tried making cut-ups. So I made a few, and I used that technique here and there to somehow get something started when I just felt like writing, but I didn't have anything in mind. And then I start thinking, okay, I'll play the cut-up game. And sometimes it would actually really work. Throw it out the window, and it'll come in the door. John Latouche to Brion Gysin. For Brion Gysin, the original blue-eyed sailor of the Sahara, welding your ship with rivets of Japanese calligraphy, you tack your sails of smoke and rise like the golden eagles of Fabergé, stolen from the blunted edge of a Tangier fantasy. Searching in a world of reflections, I invoke the spirits, both celestial and demonic.
He said, I write to be loved. And for his writing, one cannot love him too much. But for his talking, one could love him like all the time, you know, like hugging him. He was such a grand character. His voice and the way he was walking and moving. It was just beautiful. And the next row of windows on the 6th floor where Brion Gysin stayed. This is where we first met in January 1972. The same year at Christmas, William and Brion invited me to spend Christmas and New Year's with them. And I spent like 2.5 weeks in this house. And it was a fantastic time. I mean, there was quite a bit of difference in age. And what was fascinating was we had the same concerns. At night we would find out, is there enough whiskey? Do we have enough to smoke? Where do we get any food? And how much money do we carry around? I said, these old guys, and so famous and prominent, and the same concerns as I had. 305 is just over there. And that's the building one could see from Brion Gysin's kitchen, from apartment 22. He loved the idea to have these guys as neighbors.
Whispered in my ear once, you know, Gysin worked with the CIA. For years, he was a CIA agent. And, I mean, it's complete invention, right? He briefly, for a period of about a year, was in counter-espionage corps of the Canadian Army in the Second World War. But he was at school. He was studying to become and the war ended. And thus his career as a spy ended. But just the thought that he somehow was involved in this, and it's always, well, can you provide some evidence of this? There was never any evidence of it, right? It's just sort of, just part of the whole, you know, the mystery.
Con and bullshit. And we have heard enough con and bullshit.
Each time you have an avant-garde, and whatever century is, you have this kind of great liars with a G and an L.
I think he was interested in purely aesthetic terms with unraveling control. And I think with him, there was a more direct self-exploration as well. You know, those statements of the name Brion Gysin being a kind of control system, and that when he painted or did art, he actually disappeared as Brion Gysin and became this kind of invisible force operating through painting or through sound poems, or presumably the Dreamachine.
What's happened since Brion and William passed on is that control isn't really the issue anymore. Control has become so all-pervasive in the media and in culture as globalization happens that we're actually fighting inertia.
Gentlemen, this was to be expected. After all, he's been a medium all his life.
Aristotle already said that a man thinks through images, with images, not concepts, not words, images. So if you meditate on that, you're bound one day or other to invent a machine that strips it down to the essentials, which is what Brion and Ian did.
Well, I talked to Ian Somerville about it, who was a mathematician. I said, how can we do this at home? And with the very meager means that we had at our disposal, we worked out something, but it wasn't anything like this great, very perfected machine that we have here all these years later.
Here's Ian Somerville right here. He was the technician who put it together, and he was a very brilliant mind. He was a professional mathematician, which Brion wasn't.
I met him at a party where they had punch spiked with acid. I thought he was quite a dark presence, yeah.
Ian never really used his maths and stuff after university. You know, he never kind of did much.
Well, he became a computer programmer.
Oh, afterwards, yes. Yeah. Yeah, when he and Bill split up and stuff, yeah. And he finally got a driving license and then got killed in the car. He shouldn't have learned.
Now what it says is healer sauce or healer sauce. What do you hear it say? Don't you hear it say anything?
You hear it? Can the light effect be efficient without the sound? Even the fellow sitting in the bus was the sound completely absent. Light and sound are playing together, which means that the lights alone are not enough. There is no trance without sound. And nobody can say where it is affecting, in which part of the body it is affecting.
Many a sailor has drowned after being mesmerized when the sun flickers on the waves near sunset or sunrise. St. Paul of the Gospels had a revelation on the road to Damascus when a light from heaven flickered all around him. The mystics have long known about FlicKeR.
It's alleged that Nostradamus would do this, you know, with this direct sun, sitting in a tower with the sun on his eyelids, and that this is how his prophetic visions were produced.
This is The Living Brain by William Grey-Walter. William Burroughs, I think, was the first one who read it. He handed a copy to Brion Gysin, and Brion Gysin first read about the FlicKeR phenomenon.
The FlicKeR effect was widely reported, and so in The Living Brain, which was his popular work he wrote in 1953, what he claims is that the FlicKeR effect was first discovered by a group of soldiers who were travelling down a kind of tree-lined lane in France. So Walter's interested in the use of kind of like photic simulation and the use of light stimulation, first of all, just simply as a technique for triggering epileptic seizures. And what he's doing in his clinical work is trying to find the brainwave patterns which map onto epileptic seizures. But from that point, then FlicKeR starts to take on a life of its own. And it escapes from a clinical setting out into the kind of beatnik world.
Now meet Dr. Grey-Walter of Bristol. Why the torch? Well, here's the reason. It's Toby, a mechanical tortoise with an electronic brain which functions like the human mind.
I mean, a lot of people credit him with being the father of artificial life. To some extent, Walter can take credit for that. I mean, all Walter was trying to do was trying to demonstrate that what we see as very kind of like spiritual or transcendent experiences can in fact be modelled out of relatively simple devices.
It can also negotiate obstacles. When it hits an object, the pressure on the shell causes a short circuit of the photoelectric cell mechanism, and the tortoise moves at random until it is free of the obstacle.
Grey-Walter speculated that our ancestors, seeing the sun flickering in the leaves, would fall into spiritual trances, and this is where we got the idea of the tree of life.
Of course we can sell it. Of course we can market it. Everybody would want one, you know. But then nobody knew what it could be. They didn't know whether it was an art object or whether it was a toy, an entertainment, what it was.
Yes?
Look at that picture.
Hello?
Yes. Good. Look at that picture. Thank you. Thank you. How did it seem to you now? Good.
Columbia Records, this thing and that thing, and we went to people who made novelty toys. We went everywhere. And some reason we just couldn't seem to find anybody who wanted to risk doing it. I couldn't believe it.
And people might suffer seizures. So how common it is? We think one person every 4,000 is susceptible to FlicKeR-induced seizures.
But as for the other people, are they possible that they might gain something, calm, creativity, things?
Well, I think those people should buy a Dreamachine, right?
Fundamentally, he saw it as a ticket. You know, it was a way to more than transporting him into one of these altered states of consciousness. It was a way to transport him from a garret in Paris, living an impoverished life of an artist, to a state of some comfort and wealth.
Olympia magazine, he has sort of this sort of an early version of it where it was actually in the, that you could cut out the cylinder and pause and paste it all together and put it together, and on your home LP phonograph record turntable, you could put this thing and do it. Anybody else like Brion, who had sort of this idea, and more or less at the right time with the right connections, would have parlayed into some gigantic thing, and have $20 million in houses in Malibu and whatever, just put nothing, like a lava lamp. That happened to the lava lamp, but somehow Brion was never able to do it.
Well, a lava lamp is just camp.
the Dream Machine was asking for more. I don't think it really works unless you've smoked a pipe of hash. Or I think it's too dangerous if you've taken acid, because you can flip out. And it's also dangerous if you have any tendency to epilepsy. You know, you can get convulsions or something.
You can build one, you know. It's sort of like the Ark of the Covenant in the Bible, where they give these 23 pages of instructions. Now, God says you have to make this 23.5 cubits this way, and then throw a sailor's knot 5 cubits to 42 degrees over here, and, you know, and cover it in purple cloth always, you know.
We're actually going to bioengineer a Dream Machine. We'll take a bunch of fireflies, isolate the phosphorescence, and then turn it into some type of flickering mammal. No. Here's our anarchist cookbook to make a Dream Machine. This is like first-year art school stuff. It's great. You have a nice little list of ingredients. You need a centimeter ruler. You need a set square, thin lead pencil, 1 rubber, which I'm assuming is not a condom. Cardboard glue, something to cut with, 100-watt bulb. The tabs of the cardboard just go under here, and then you place it on. It's gonna all be taped. Ready to go? It works beautifully. It really is that simple.
But there was a time when we thought this would be the great drugless turn-on of the 1960s. And I got myself into all sorts of complicated deals with Philips, who make those light bulbs and things like that one in there. And they really were looking for machines that would send people to sleep. I was looking for machines that got people more awake, so this is where we're at.
I think we were trying to sell it to Pi Television, weren't they? Yeah. Or Philips or something.
Philips.
It was at Philips. I guess they didn't want to get into bed with Brion Gysin, really, would be my guess.
The thing about Brion, this was just one of many things, and it poisoned his life. The fact that it wasn't successful. I mean, the Dream Machine just being one, or the painter thing, he comes to New York, and his paintings are stuff that are thoroughly original and totally, you know, developed by him. And there are these people like Mark Tobey and Ken Nolan and various others who do something similar, and he's just dismissed as having copied them. And he didn't copy them at all. He sort of came upon it by himself and through more Arabic calligraphy and all the rest, but completely dismissed by the New York art world.
Perhaps the powers that be are sophisticated, and they didn't want a society riddled with profits, especially when they're not making a profit. I'm just very cynical about the human species at the moment. I'm not sure if they even deserve to have a drugless high. I think they deserve to have their bottoms smacked.
Hello. Look at that. Yes. Hello. Yes. Good. Hello.
Brion, whenever there was some success coming, like having a good show or a publication, very probable, he fucked it up one way or the other. He had a talent to, you know, to kill upcoming successful moments.
Hello. Thank you. Yes. Hello. Look at that picture. Hello. Yes. Good. Hello. Yes. Thank you. Hello. Yes. Yes. Hello. Hello. Yes. Hello. Hello.
Gysin was a very, very bitter artist, a bitter writer, a bitter poet. But Brion Gysin was someone who tried in so many fields and never really succeeded in any. So I think the bitterness kind of was his great characteristic. This was not a pleasant person to be around. This is someone who had, you know, legion fights with people around him, was for the most part disliked, except by the few who adored him, and thus he was able to maintain this cult-like status.
And that, am I? And that I am. And that, I am. And that, am I? And that, I am. That I am, 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 I am.
The moment I met Brion, everything, it was as if, you know, you've just turned a switch and the rest of the world goes a diluted grey. And the world inside Brion's sphere is psychedelic colours. It was that different. restricted area. This is, oops, the remains of the archive.
Genesis P-Orridge is physically morphing his body into a woman's, testing evolution, creating a mutation in one lifetime.
This is the stuff that Scotland Yard didn't get.
This is what they didn't take, yeah. Like, so each box has a number, and then, thank goodness, oh, here's it. Oh, look, isn't this nice here? That's the one that I was meant to get. Brion was doing me a psychic cross, look. Can you see it? So, you see they're wearing this fur thing around them? Those are weasels.
Why did Scotland Yard take everything?
Well, according to Timothy Leary, the same reason that they wanted his archive, and they quite often take archives of radical artists and don't return them, and either destroy them or keep them. They want to know what everybody's doing.
Jin keeps the portal into Gysin and Burroughs' experiments in magic open. That he now looks a bit like Marianne Faithfull and maybe even Layla Luce just makes me remember the coolest thing Burroughs ever said: there are no accidents.
Brion Jones. This is the only painting he's known to have done in his life on the wall of one of his apartments in London. I really like this. You see, you've got the phoenix rising out of all the alchemical things here, and then the grave with the water, look. Kind of spooky, huh? I knew that Brion Gysin had met Brion Jones, and the final project Brion Jones worked on was a recording of the master musicians of Jajuka.
Of course, it was a sort of pilgrimage to see Burroughs and Bowles, and of course, Brion. Already he was extremely involved in the Jajuka group, which is a bunch of heavy witchcraft, pre-Islamic brotherhood of men doing strange things, like bringing about ghosts.
Gysin and the Beats were drawn to Tangier in the 50s when it was an international free zone. It was in Morocco he discovered his past identity as a 10th century king of the assassins, the old man of the mountain, Hassani Sabah.
Feast time came around, the Eid al-Kabir, when each head of a family in all of Islam has to kill a sheep in memory of Father Abraham's sacrifice. I would make an attempt to get up there and occasionally take friends who were capable of listening. Among the writers that I took up to the mountain, one could name Paul Bowles, and then of course William Burroughs, who came up twice, I believe, Brion Jones of the Rolling Stones at that time, who went up to the mountain after he had come here with most of the group in 1968, it must have been.
There would be a car or a bus or something, what they call museums, sort of a religious feast where the great musicians would go and play and dance for three days. And every day, one day we'd go over to Tetuan, another day we'd be going to Marrakesh or to Gulimene or to Ouarzazate into the Sahara and then come back. And then 2 days later, it was by chance in Magnessa, we'd go back down. And Brion, since they all knew Brion on some level, or they respect all of the Moroccans, musicians for sure, but all the ordinary people had sort of because he spoke Arabic and they had this commanding presence. So each, for that 6 months, these endless, miraculous things took place.
Brion wasn't just a passing through. He lived there. He and Burroughs and Bowles actually took a house and lived there. That's something else. He was an expatriate, not only to France, like so many other great American writers in the 30s before them, but into an Arab society, Arab-speaking society. That's something else. That's really another universe. And he took from that a great amount of spiritual energy. Well, that's the police or the fire department. So we talk about Brion, and of course, starts a fire somewhere.
rattle.
Burroughs, and I think Gysin helping him, were seriously working on putting spells on the astronauts in outer space in the space station. And the idea that these people that went into outer space would be contacted by entities.
He'd had enough of me in Paris at one period and wanted me to go back to London, and I didn't want to go back. So, you know, every day I was still turning up in the morning. I had a key, you know, so I could just go in and all that. So I was about a week overdue from leaving, going back to London and all that. He didn't say anything, but suddenly everything I touched in his apartment, glass, you know, I shut the windows, everything, it would break every time. Every time. Flowers in the vase, you know. And obviously it was getting quite scary. But also, I mean, it was, you know, there could be no doubt who was responsible for this, but at the same time, he was wrecking his own apartment. Oh, he was a devil with things like that.
I think everybody's experienced telepathy. That every time that you say, oh, I was just thinking of you when you rang up. That happens constantly for just about everybody. Yet most of the people who have that happen will tell you they don't believe in telepathy.
The word that comes up a lot is transcendence.
They really believed in that. They weren't bullshitting.
And that must have obviously intrigued you greatly.
Well, yeah. Yeah, I mean, a lot more than the bloody Maharishi.
This is where I make my sculptures, over here. A bit of a mess, I'm afraid.
Jin believes that things made by artists are magical talismans containing the power of the artist within.
Mounted on here, turning slowly. In the 60s, inevitably through the use of psychedelic drugs, some individuals that were incredibly innately creative had shamanic experiences and were channeling. I think Brian Jones and Jim Morrison and Janis Joplin are really easy examples, Jimi Hendrix, and others that we don't know the names of. But in other societies that we think of as primitive, as soon as someone starts to demonstrate the symptoms of being shamanic, of having these abilities to see other dimensions or be visionary, they're taken and looked after and protected and trained and given different disciplines to survive and to understand the shocks to their system, both mentally and physically. And it's a very honored calling. But in the West, in the 60s, these people were just seen as very extraordinary performers. But if you watch carefully what they're trying to do, especially on stage, with Jim Morrison and Janis Joplin, they're shamanic dancing. They're channeling some kind of spirit force.
Recalling active agents, all recalling agents active, all. Brion Gysin, Hassan, I, Robert. You collaborators, you liars, you traitors. You now will speak to the world under the name of Hassan Saba.
If Brion had a lineage or a teacher, it would be Hassan Saba, who was 1,000 years before. And maybe some transmission did take place. I mean, it was just on that level, just on that level, you know, very unexplainable.
In the 10th century, from the Valley of the Assassins in what is today northern Iran, in the castle of Alamut, there lived a remarkable king, known to the world as the Old Man of the Mountain, Hassan Saba. He ruled a vast empire with no army to speak of. Instead, he would recruit assassins from among his young soldiers. Nobody can be sure of how he brainwashed them, but no one has ever achieved his level of success. Legend tells of them being given vast amounts of hashish, where they would fall into a blissful sleep, awakening into a garden of earthly delights, which Hassan had set up within the castle. Hassan had founded a heretical Islamic sect, a whole new control system. The next morning, the soldier would be brought to Hassan, who knew all the details of the young man's dream, things only a god could know. The assassin was sent to a far-off land to befriend the local ruler. And he would serve him well over many years. But if there was a problem, if one day Hassan was disobeyed by the foolish king, the penalty was sure and swift. Hassani Sabah ruled with his long knife for many years and lived to the ripe old age of 90. Much has been said of his last words.
They were into Hassan Sabah as the original assassin who was kind of driven from paradise or from his relationship to the prophets and became an assassin figure who was able to have stealth societies infiltrate the control societies of his day and transform them. I'm a big fan of that kind of aesthetic, but the funny thing and the twisted thing is that if you now update that formula, you have somebody like Osama bin Laden.
They saw themselves as cultural assassins, you know, in a sense of sort of terrorism. And Burroughs himself put together these amazing essays about how to use sound as a weapon.
Towers, open fire!
Passing themselves off as an artistic avant-garde movement was a cover to quite an extent. I mean, obviously they were wonderful practitioners of such a thing, but a cover for their esoteric activities.
So studies have been made on these visions in the Alpha Band, and you also see all of these symbols which are common to all the great religions. Across this, you even see the eye of Isis suddenly, very slowly sometimes, just sort of streams across your line of vision here.
You know, Gysin at once wanted the Dreamachine to be an artwork. He wanted, you know, it was a sculpture, kinetic sculpture. But on the other hand, he recognized it really, it represented the end of art, because suddenly it was just light that was creating the imagery. There wasn't the painterly touch.
Well, it's self-made art in a way, self-created art, and nobody sees what you do when you close your eyes, and nobody sees what you do when your eyes open. So it's totally individual art that's coming out of oneself.
C'est ce qu'il dit. D'ailleurs, il avait rédigé un petit texte que l'on devait mettre à côté de la Dreamachine, dans lequel il dit effectivement que c'est la fin de l'art, c'est un objet à regarder les yeux fermés. Et puis, à la fois, bien sûr, ce qui provoque avec ce principe, c'est la naissance ou la renaissance de, en fait, toute l'histoire de l'art.
How is this art? This is something that's coming from our neurological makeup. You know, it's a brain response to a stimulus. So it really, is that art? I don't think so. It's really the end of art, because suddenly everyone is an artist, because everyone can create this.
Yeah, well, he thought it was the end of art, because you have to look at it with your eyes closed.
Ah, right, there you go. That's over my head. I'm not smart. I'm not smart.
Well, you're into transcendence.
Yeah, no, right.
You talk about golf and transcendence.
Right, all right. But yeah, that makes you look at it with your eyes closed, right? Or you don't look at it. Actually, that's the way I used it. Was I never really liked looking at it too much. I liked being in it, or looking at things that, you know, as it projected on whatever was around. I just liked being there with it.
I mean, you go deeper into your head at that point. You know, art doesn't stop when you close your eyes. I mean, especially in these days, you know, lots of people making art are making art that's more about concept or thought than anything else, you know? So in a certain way, ultimately, art is here.
The ability to make your own inner movie is now a software thing, whether or not you have Garage or iTunes or iMovie or iPod. You know, all of the puns there are kind of Burroughsian. The iPod, of course, if you see those dancing shadows on every street corner of the industrialized world,
People are dancing to their own, you know, again, turntables of the mind. So the invisible war going on here is between operating systems. It's eerie how a lot of the artists of the West, whether you were the Italian futurist, whether you were looking at surrealism, where they call automatic writing, all of them were trying to figure out what happens when the imagination gets caught up in these mechanical devices and we have to play back ourselves.
I was in Göttingen for my 45th birthday in 1986. It was a very beautiful summer day. Sunday morning, around 8:30, I dreamt about Brion. The elevator in his house was very, very small. And in this dream, the elevator was rather wide and hung with precious carpets. And it was very spacious. And there was a toilet seat. And Brion was sitting on this toilet with his pants up. And he had a black blouson zipped up to his neck. And he was sitting there a little like that and sad. And I tried to make a very encouraging gesture. Maybe said something like, "Hey, Brion," or something. And then Brion made just this resignative mood of, like, shit, you know, forget it. And this was so vivid. And I woke up and I noted it down. And before that was a little scene with William in Basel. Very different setting and more positive. And then I wrote that down and I went to sleep again. And later after breakfast, I copied it and sent it, one copy to Brion and one copy to William. And in the afternoon, around 5 o'clock, Fafa de Palamini, one of his closest friends, called in Göttingen. He had found out where I was to tell me that Brion had died that same morning. So, mixed in the sadness of losing somebody close, there was coming in a little feeling of relief for him, and then a kind of joy that he had waved goodbye. I thought, hey, beautiful. Well, that's the story. Yeah.
One has the feeling with Gysin of the conjurer swallowed up by his own spell, in some sense. You know, that he conjured up these things, and it's almost as though he was sucked into the force unleashed by his own magic. He somehow disappeared as the agent of the forces that he was setting in motion. And that in some sense was a success. It actually proved that he was able to do something or other. And again, you know, that's why we're talking about him 20 years after his death, that some kind of force was unleashed and made its way into all these different channels of culture. But he himself seems to have disappeared in the process.
In Paris, the city of light, where Brion Gysin died, poor and unknown, we deliver our dream machine to Iggy Pop, a purist in the craft of Dionysian transcendence, better known as rock and roll.
Oh, there it is. Beautiful. Yeah. Wow. We'll go off if we haven't been, like, strangled or if God knows whatever happens, and leave it on about...
Just leave it until you come back home.
No. Leave it on about 30 seconds. Count to 30 and then get it off fast or pull the plug. And there'll be weirdness.
Because it'll still be black.
Yeah, and then the guy will have to figure out it'll be dark and then it'll be light and people will be pissed off. And everyone, what is the meaning? You know, it'd be good. Yeah.
Look at that picture.
Yes. Hello.
Good. Yeah, thank you. Look at that picture. Does it seem to be persisting?
I am that I am. I am that am I. Am I that I am? Am I that am? I that I am. Am that I? Am I? That I am, I am. That am I am. That I am. Am I? That I am. I that am I? I that am. I am I. Am that. I am.
It's hypnotic. Beautiful.